Listen to their voices. Whose voice does this sound like? Does this sound like Donald Trump? Listen to the Black Lives Matter leader in Washington, D.C., your capital, the capital of the country. Listen to what he's saying, telling his people. This is cut 6.
I'm at the point where I'm ready to put these police in the fucking grave. I'm at the point where I want to burn the fucking White House down. I want to take it to the senators. I want to take it to the Congress. I want to take the fight to them. And at the end of the day, if they ain't gonna hear us, we burn them the f down.
So whose voice is that? That's Nancy Pelosi's voice. That's the voice of the left. That's the voice of these people who go on CNN and say Trump is Hitler, which they can say safely for only one reason: Trump's not Hitler. If he were Hitler, they wouldn't be able to say Trump is Hitler. When they fly off the handle and they say, oh, there's a fascist, there's a dictator, there's an authoritarian, the way you can tell that they're wrong is the fact that they're still there, still getting paid to give commentary. So where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that the poor outcomes? And please don't think for a minute that I don't have a heart for the poor, no matter what color the poor are. I mean, I think the poor in this country do better than the poor have ever done anywhere else. That may be true, but still, I understand what it's like to scrape by, and I understand what it's like to have dysfunction in your family, crime in your family. I understand what it's like to have the police arrest somebody you love. I get all that. It's not that I don't have no heart for it, but the narrative that they're being fed and have been fed for now 60 years is that it's the fault of racist America. It's this systemic racism, this idea that doesn't mean anything. If what was happening, if the poor outcomes in some black communities, because that's all we're talking about, nobody hates black people. This is the only white majority nation on earth can say it elected a black head of state twice. Nobody else can say that. This is not a racist country. It's not that there's zero racism here. It's that it's systemically, institutionally, which is really what we should talk about, because that's the only thing politics can address is the racism in the institution. There is no racism in our institutions, rather the opposite. If there's anything, there's a little bit of favoritism through affirmative action. But the thing is, the narrative is that the bad outcomes are the results of racism. And if you say they're not the results of racism, you must think that black people are just inferior. Well, no. If it were true that the Democrat institution of slavery or the Democrat institution of Jim Crow were responsible for what was happening, you would expect things to be slowly getting better, right? As Jim Crow and as slavery faded into the background, people would start to do better. Generationally, you would start to move up through the world as the effects of these oppressive, truly institutionally racist programs, as they disappeared, you would expect people to rise up. And that's what happened. That is what happened to black people as they started to come out of Jim Crow, as they started to come out of, as slavery started to fade into the past, black people's lives improved. Black people started to move into the middle class. Until the 1950s, black women were more likely to be married than white women. In the 1950s, 52% of all black children lived with both parents until the age of 17. By the 1980s, that's plummeted to 6%. And remember, being a fatherless child is the biggest indicator of that your life is going to go bad. It doesn't have to, but it's the biggest indicator. I always say this to people. I've visited several prisons in my life. You go from one cell to the next, and if you're a racist, you might say, oh, I see they're all black, they're all Hispanic. No. What you're seeing is fatherless child, again and again and again, okay? Fatherless kids are just in danger of going to prison, of taking drugs, of committing suicide, everything like this. So the family fell apart, not back in slavery days when Democrats were actually selling black people down the river. Not back then. They fell apart after the 50s. They fell apart between the 50s and the 80s. What happened? The Great Society happened. The Great Society, they were warned, their own senators warned them that the Great Society programs were going to destroy the black family. It's not the fault of black people that they acted like human beings. When you pay people not to work, they don't work. That's the way human beings are. When you pay them when they have children out of wedlock, they have children out of wedlock. That's the way incentives work. It's not one race's fault. It's people. It's the way people are. So Thomas Sowell, the great Thomas Sowell, one of the great geniuses around today, says, if we wanted to be serious about evidence, We might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. In other words, we could compare hard evidence on the legacy of slavery with hard evidence on the legacy of liberals. They don't want to do that. Why? Because these things pour money into Democrat coffers. They pour money, trillions. I think it's been $15 trillion has been spent on the war on poverty, and poverty is winning. I mean, when FDR did this stuff, people didn't have electricity. They didn't have water in their communities. And he brought that in, whether it was right or wrong, whether you thought the Tennessee Valley Authority was a good thing or a bad thing. It solved the problem it was meant to solve. None of these programs has done a damn thing for anybody, but they have incentivized dependence, and they have incentivized unemployment, and they've incentivized not getting married and having illegitimate children. And if you want to know why you're suffering, maybe you should look to the things that you think are good things that are poisonous, like that are like drugs. They feel good at the moment, but they don't do anything.